Good morning. Good morning. It's 10 o'clock. Welcome to Some Education. Today is the exciting topic of suffering and why we need it and how we work through it. This has been, I would say, since I was just kind of like a youngster, no matter what, like even when I was playing hockey, when I would go through different events like the end of season or the end of a school year, or I'd watch like an event come to an end, like anything that would kind of have to come to an end. I would tend, just the way that I was kind of raised and built, I would tend to elicit kind of sadness in me. And so like those farewells generally, at least in the past, bothered me. They don't so much now. I know how to actually work through it, but essentially it was me suffering, and it was me suffering at the loss of things. And in experiencing that, it elicited sadness. And so suffering from a human being standpoint is kind of equated with sadness. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to unpack, what it means and how you can use it in your life to transform where you're at. So let me first kind of use this as an example of, we'll call this event. And there's lots of different events that can go on in our life, but let's just use this as an event. And something happens that you perceive or label as essentially bad. Okay. Now, in that moment, what we're going to do, essentially, as soon as we label it bad, just like I did when the season was over, when something came to an end, it would be like, that's bad that it's coming to an end. I want it to continue. And so now that it's bad, I'm going to suffer because I'm sad. I'm experiencing loss. So when something is, so just know that your mind is considering that something is bad based on the experience, based on your life experience, and now you suffer. Now, when you suffer and you experience sadness, what I want you to know is that there's basically a ratio in the mind. I didn't like math until I actually understood perception. There's a ratio of 7-1, negative to positive. Okay, there's a ratio in the mind that sees 7 parts negative to 1 part positive. When we experience in our mind a 7-1 ratio, that is going to equal sadness. Okay, and I'm going to unpack this a little bit more so that you kind of have a scheme as to where I'm going with this whole suffering and sadness bit. So you got to stay with me here just a little bit. But I want to start off with the premise: suffering, sadness, loss, feeling disconnected, feeling alone, feeling isolated, feeling like nothing's working, feeling like something's never going to end. If that's some of the experience in there of suffering and what you hear, that is a ratio of 7-1. Now, why is that important? Well, it's really important because suffering is a pathway. Suffering is a pathway towards you uncovering illusions, biases, beliefs. It's a pathway towards the truth. The truth is, if we jump way, way, way forward, the truth is that everything is love, the way that it's all put together. But in suffering, it's all bad. And so I'm going to demonstrate, I'm going to chalk out this pathway for you so that you know where we're going from suffering to actually letting go. Okay, so I'm going to chalk this up here. So suffering goes here. Then there's an extreme polarization. I'm going to draw out the 7 major stages of healing for you. Then there's where we feel stuck in a perspective. Then we feel empowered. Then we feel like we alter our beliefs, we're changing our belief systems. Then we focus on a future, a compelling future, an inspiring future, and then we let go. Now, these are all ranges of energy in a system. So I'll put E for energy. And as we move this through the stages of healing, from suffering to polarization, to stuck in a perspective, empowered, altering your beliefs, focus on your future, and letting go, as we go through those, the energy, overall energy, is rising at each level. Your energy is going up, your awareness goes up, your level of posture goes up, and you literally rise from suffering, which is the most minimal you could feel in a situation, to letting go, which is the most maximal you can feel in any given situation. So your energy, your awareness, and your posture all rise from the moment of suffering all the way through to letting go. Now, in the mind, as I mentioned, there's a 7-to-1 negative to positive. In polarization, when you're getting pissed off, anger is a kind of a primary fuel for that. It's 6-to-1. When you feel stuck in a perspective and frustrated, so this is more like anger, this is more sadness. When you feel stuck and frustrated, it's a 5-to-1 ratio. When you feel empowered, which is some courage, you demonstrate a 4-to-1. So just imagine, as you're moving through these emotional states, how your body's changing, how your posture's changing, how your thinking process is changing, what you're experiencing in life is different, because the ratio of your perception, how you're seeing things, is being altered. When you break biases and you're curious, you access curiosity. It's a 3-to-1 ratio. To be curious, you need a 3-to-1 negative to positive ratio in order to actually be curious. It elicits that emotion. If you're suffering sadness, it's a 7-to-1. It's a formula, okay? If we're focusing on the future, which is excitement and enthusiasm, that's a 2-to-1 ratio. And when we let go, which is acceptance and appreciation for what is, the old spiritual principle, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. The pathway from suffering to letting go is a ratio of your perception from 7-to-1 to 1-to-1. At 7-to-1, you're on extreme subjective bias. 1-to-1, we move towards objective truth. And the objective truth is that there's equal amounts of positives and negatives in any given situation. So suffering is a direct pathway to letting go. Most people don't necessarily fully understand that, but so that we go a little bit deeper, then, okay, well, it's moving from sadness to appreciation and acceptance. Okay, that's another one. It's also moving your ratio of your perception of how you're seeing the world from 7-to-1 subjective bias to a 1-to-1 objective truth. What is the, just a quick question here. The A at the top of the screen is awareness. This one here, I'm assuming. Your awareness is growing. So your energy is growing, your awareness is growing, your posture is improving, your emotional state is changing, okay? And the ratio of perception is changing. And you're moving from a subjective bias to more of an objective truth of the kind of symmetry, supersymmetry of the universe, which is that there are positives and negatives. Just like a magnet, you have positives and negatives, and a magnet has equal amounts of positive and negative. Even if you chop a magnet, it's still positive and negative. You can't get rid of them. And so, but subjectively, we could get rid of one half. We can get rid of a positive and just see negative. We can do that with our mind. It just doesn't mean it's true. And so if you think of this, when we're suffering, there's a split between the conscious and the unconscious. So what we are in suffering is we're consciously aware of the downsides or negatives. The benefits or upsides are in the unconscious world. So it's like when we're driving and we turn our shoulder, we don't see what's in our blind spot. So the same thing, when we have a moment or experience an event and we're suffering with that, we instantaneously create a blind spot in our system that has us focused consciously on the downsides or negatives, and unconsciously now we store the positives and upsides. So they're unavailable to us. So in that moment, that's why I'm saying we have the most amount of subjective bias and the least amount of awareness, because all that data is stored and we can't find it. We can't see it. It's like the blind spot. Okay. And so then what happens is, as we're moving through the stages of healing, depending on time frames, you're slowly pulling the information from the unconscious to your conscious. So as you're upping your level of energy and your awareness is improving and growing, the data keeps coming in front of you consciously that was stored in the unconscious. So it's like you're pulling data from your blind spot and placing that in your conscious mind, slowly over time, balancing out your ratio of your perception. So these things are kind of all happening simultaneously. Now, for some people, it takes like 30 years to pull all the information where they finally see the order in something. Or sometimes if you ask a good question, it pulls the information from the unconscious and puts it into the conscious mind so that you could more clearly see it at an accelerated rate. But if people just go at it on their own and just do their own thing, you're going to slowly drip and take information from the unconscious and slowly place it into your conscious mind, which is going to slowly shift your perception over time towards the path of letting go, which is objective truth, which is the path of acceptance and the path of appreciation. So this is kind of the mechanism, I guess you could say, and why suffering is essential, in a sense, is because we live in a world of contrast, that not everything that we can see in our mind's eye is in a state of full appreciation. It's like you don't necessarily just have one state all the time. You move through various states. And even in spiritual traditions, the path of moving towards whether you do like transcendental meditation or some sort of awakening spirituality practices, where the impetus, the catalyst, is to move the mind towards a state of unity and a state of oneness, but it's really a state of 1-to-1 ratio, of seeing objective reality, of seeing the magnet with both sides. Once you see that the magnet has both sides, it's like there's the magnet and you see the truth of the magnet. And so with any event or circumstance or person, this pathway from going from a extreme bias subjectively, where information is missing and it's stored out of you, towards completing the puzzle and pulling that information forward, is the path from suffering to letting go. And it expresses itself through the body, through your energy, through your awareness, and it also expresses it through the mind, through the ratios. And so part of the path that I've been on over 20 years studying this work and doing the work is kind of knowing the end game. So I can only stay a victim for so long, because once I know that this is the end game is letting go, the end game is acceptance, the end game is appreciation. And I've demonstrated that to myself. And I have evidence in my life that that's true, that I can access states of appreciation regardless of what's going on. When I know that that is available in me, then now it becomes my responsibility, if that's what I want to experience, that I can only stay a victim for so long. Because now I know that this is available here for me. This appreciation and seeing the order in something and seeing this 1-to-1 ratio and acceptance is available. Well, now it's up to me when I'm ready to go in and do the work on something so that I can move my system towards a 1-to-1 ratio. And so the first exercise that we do in heart-centered leadership is a couple of things, because a lot of people don't like feeling sad. We don't like that experience. So one of the questions that we have at the beginning when we start to look at sadness or suffering, as an example, and we go in and we find and discover moments where we were sad or suffering. And you're going to hear this very often, is what is the value? Benefit to me in my values of said experience. Even sadness alone, most people don't even appreciate the emotion of sadness. Of like, well, what's the benefit of sadness? Well, think about what you do when you're sad. Maybe you touch your chest. Maybe you actually are able to express some emotion. Like maybe you cry. Maybe you like feel that actually like express some tears out. I mean, tears are cleansing in and of itself. If you've ever, when you cry, doesn't it feel good in part? Like to cry, it feels good. It helps to reset the nervous system. It resets breathing patterns. When you're crying, it's like it's like you're resetting your nervous system. So there's physiological benefits from it. It feels good to cry, to let it out, to release some of the tension. So sadness comes with a myriad of benefits that people tend to try to avoid. But when you go in and you actually look at some of the value and benefits that you get from the experience in and of itself, it's liberating because you're not fearing sadness. You're seeing it as a more of an experience that you move through versus something to avoid. It can feel good. It can feel quite pleasurable to feel sad. It could provide you an opportunity to isolate yourself, and create more introspection, to think about yourself, to evaluate things. It gives you time oftentimes because when you're sad, you might separate yourself from other people to give you time to contemplate and to consider what's going on. So sadness is a good strategy or vehicle to many different physiological and psychological benefits of sadness. And most people were trained to avoid this thing. Now, I'm not condoning that is like the best strategy to use in your life, like repetitiously over time, where that becomes your default mode into a habit of, but also like threading together for you that there is a utility to sadness, and you don't have to fear like getting in a habit of it. A lot of people do consider it's like, well, if I find the value in something, like, won't I do it more? No, not really. In fact, it's ironic. You kind of do it less because partly like you're not trying to avoid it. You experience its full range. You do it, you do the sadness, and it moves through you and washes through you. And there's not a lot of fear or judgment about that particular emotional state within you. So you're more free of judgment so that the emotion can move through you versus it binding, you judging yourself. Ooh, this isn't a good time. This is the wrong place. I shouldn't do it. All those things that we get in our mind banter that go on. So finding value in sadness, to me in my life, has given me a freedom of experience to feel sad when I need to, and not fear that, because I see the not only the utility in it, but I see the value for myself physiologically, psychologically, to do that. And ironically, it happens less. So these are ways that we use in the Heart Centered Leadership Program to become more aware of just our nature. And this is what we partly cover in the first week, the first stage of healing, suffering, is going in and finding out like what are the values to the sadness in particular as an emotional state. How about suffering? And we go through and we pick this apart, and we use the mind to open the heart. And that's why it's called heart-centered leadership, because we use the mind to do this, to open the heart so that we can have greater, like, dissolve self-judgments and be more accepting, loving, and appreciative of our very nature. So it's a beautiful kind of process that way. So I want to kind of coach you through that. In summary, suffering is a pathway to letting go. Suffering is a pathway to go from extreme biases to objective truth and objective reality in terms of seeing both sides in any situation or circumstance or person. And suffering is a call, it's a pathway for you to become embodied and go on your journey towards letting go in terms of a healing process. And so that's the way that I've viewed suffering. That's the way that I view it with my clients. It's not something to be avoided. It's not something to skirt around. It's not something to be shamed of. It's a part of every human being's experience. And it is, again, I use a call to greater levels of awareness. So that's how I use the state of suffering. It's why it's important, because it gives us the kind of the catalyst to go on this trajectory. It's humbling, and it brings us into our body, especially with our mind that can go off the rails a little bit. It brings us into the body. Suffering is an embodied process. If you try to avoid it, you don't actually come in your body. You actually just stay in the mind. And so when you do suffer, you come into the body. It's like a coming home into the body. And then from that point, you curl in and then you grow out and up. And that's the way that I kind of cyclically view the process of the stages of healing. So hopefully this was kind of helpful just to dissect this. I hope this information serves you well. I hope this kind of sparks different ideas, catalyzes different things for you. There's nothing to shame. There is nothing to get rid of. All these parts of you are absolutely beautiful in the grand scheme of things. And it's really these, these conversations are about exemplifying just how beautiful this whole process is for us. No matter where you're at in life, no matter what situation or circumstance, you can always move from being a victim, being disempowered, to feeling more empowered. And we can do it through a source of knowledge and then asking good questions that elicit towards the objective that we're trying to understand. And if we're trying to understand suffering more, then we need to be able to depolarize it and move it into a higher level of awareness. And that's what the questions do. They bring things that are tucked away, even suffering in and of itself, and we birth light onto suffering so that we could see its actual utility and order for us in our life. And with that, you become much more empowered, much more aware, and more vital around that experience of yourself, igniting more self-love and appreciation and acceptance. So anyways, hopefully this was helpful. We're 8 minutes early, but have a beautiful, beautiful day. And I wish you all the best.